Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this episode of the On the Mark Financial Forum and podcast. We have a very special guest, a celebrity in the senior space, the one and only Steve Moran. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, it's so great to be here. Passionate about senior living, about how it has this amazing ability to change the lives of people who work and live in senior living. And I really would add to that, as having been a senior living consumer, it has the potential to change the lives of family members too, to make their lives so much better.
Absolutely. Or potentially much worse if they don't do things right. So we're going to talk about some of those things today for sure, but I do appreciate you spending the time to talk with our audience. And the goal here is to help educate people on what mistakes not to make. If we can keep people from making those mistakes and causing unexpected harm of sorts to their family members or others around them, then mission accomplished. So maybe you can give the audience a little bit of background on who you are, what you do. Obviously, I've been seeing you on your podcast and everything for years, but why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I'm the founder of an organization called Senior Living Foresight. We're a thought leadership platform for people who own and operate senior living communities. And again, the idea behind everything that we produce, the content we produce, is to improve the lives of people who live and work in senior living. And we have a blog site that we produce new content on every day. We do a couple of live streams every week on LinkedIn, publish a lot of other content on LinkedIn. But ultimately, the idea is that senior living is about people. It's people who operate the communities, it's people who live in the communities, it's people who own the communities, and you've got this collection of people, and how do you make the lives of those people better? And that's all we're focused on. It sort of sounds simple and narrow, but it's huge and it's hard to do.
It for sure. There's so many components to it. There's the emotional side, the lack of caregiving. I mean, you name it, and it's a challenge, and it seems to be getting worse, right? As there's more seniors that are going to need care with the baby boomers getting older, and the rising costs of not just the care but medications. I mean, everything is getting progressively more expensive, and all these types of issues. That you said, and you said it just right. It's about educating the families and trying to help them navigate this, really unexpected world or tsunami that's going to hit everyone at some point. We're all going to deal with this to some degree, either for aging parents or for ourselves at some point. But what would you say are the biggest kind of either myths or misunderstandings that family have about caring for a loved one that's entering that age of needing senior care?
I guess the hardest part is for me, having this being a lived experience, the hardest part is that it's almost inconceivable about how hard it is. And the thing that makes it really hard is not the physical task. That can be a daunting thing when you have an older person that you've got to go clean up urine or worse, or get involved in these bodily functions that you never really thought you'd have to do. But the hardest part is that you struggle with this emotional burden. You're thinking about it. It lives with you all the time. I've got my 92-year-old stepfather who lives with us. And when I go to bed at night, I wonder if I'm going to wake up and find that he's passed away. I wonder whether I'm going to get him yelling for me in the middle of the night because he needs something, or I'm going to get up and find him laying on the floor in the bathroom. And it's just this constant emotional burden that's very, very difficult to deal with, and it takes its toll over time. I'm very fortunate that I've got a wife who's a retired nurse, and so she's very competent, more competent in many respects on this caregiving stuff. And we have plenty of financial resources so we can bring in the help we need, or at some point in time, he may need to go back into a senior living community. He had a very short stint that wasn't a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to do it differently, but I think that what mostly gets missed is how difficult it is for the families, the emotional burden.
Yeah, for sure. And nowadays you have families that are maybe more spread out than they used to be as far as geographic location. So you have family member like I'm in Southern California, my family's in Seattle. We just went through a medical situation that required a surgery and a pretty long recovery, and it's hard emotionally. You're right. That is a big burden to just not necessarily even be able to physically be there all the time, but just to be thinking about, what's going on when you're not watching. Whether you're in the other room or you're in another state, it's still a challenge. But a lot of families that we talk to haven't really planned for this, right? Are you seeing on your side that families are kind of slow to adopt the idea that this is actually something would be much better if you had planned for in advance?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really interesting question to me. I'm thinking about this. I mean, one of the comparisons, and I think the industry probably doesn't like it when I use the comparison, but I think it's a good one. Is I mean, how do you plan for things like funerals and burials? I know there are people who do that, but even if you sort of plan it and maybe do the basics and prepay the money and pick the mortuary and all that stuff in the cemetery, I don't know how much that really prepares you to do that. And I think particularly when you look at senior living, um, I might look at the community down the street and say, oh man, that's where I want my dad to go. And it might turn out that it changes hands, or that dad's got a different level of needs and it's not a really good fit, or the license. I mean, there's just so many things. So it's really, really hard. I think that planning is, and I'm not a great planner for stuff like that. So I think there are people who probably do better. But I don't know that I've ever really talked to anybody. I'm sure there are people out there who got to that point and said, oh yeah, I've got this all figured out.
Right. Well, and you can only really plan for maybe the logistics only, right? You can't plan for the emotional side of it and what it's going to feel like and the burden that you may feel. Not that we don't want to be burdened by our family's needs, but it's a drain. And I'm in the kind of sandwich generation where I've got younger kids I'm also caring for, and then parents who are starting to age a bit more, and and so it's hard to be able to be there for both. It's definitely
Well,
a challenge.
the other thing I think a lot about is that as I've gotten into this caregiving journey with my stepfather, I'm an expert. This should be a lot easier for me.
Right.
And I think that I have a much broader body of knowledge, which in some respects has helped me, but it's still been really, really confusing. I wrote a blog post a few months ago where it started out, I don't know what to do. I need help. I need somebody to tell me what to do. And I think about that and think, if somebody's never had exposure to the industry, but maybe it's better, right? Because I think that one of the downsides of being in the industry is that I have higher expectations.
Right.
And so my stepfather was in a community for 60 days. It was a terrible experience. I know there are lots of people who've been living in this community who seem to be living there fairly successfully. And I wonder why they tolerate it. But then again, maybe they don't know that it could be any better.
Right. Yeah, I guess you only know what you know or what you've seen. So yeah, and the financial piece of this is also something that people, what I find, is generally very unprepared for. And regardless of what type of community facility they may be moving into or if they're doing home care, but the financial side is something that people are grossly underprepared for and really haven't thought through. And oftentimes, sometimes people's home is their only real resource that's left, because once they've probably been aging for a while before they get to the point of maybe needing to be in a assisted living community or something similar. But are you seeing that people are preparing for those things earlier? Like, are you seeing that the communities are trying to cater to people that may have a little bit more longevity in a community, like a life estate community, for example? Are you seeing any trends in that regard?
So I think the industry has this dream of attracting a younger population. We have largely not been able to figure out as an industry how to do that. The bottom line is that for most people, senior living is the thing you do when you have no other choice. And sometimes it's a no other choices because of economics. Mostly it's a no other choices because the caregiving burden has just become too great. From a hard reality is that it's really expensive to run a senior living community. So labor has gotten tighter, interest rates are higher, a lot of inflation over the last couple of years, and it's just really, really expensive. And communities have this very difficult job of balancing how do I keep my rates down. If I keep my rates down, it means that maybe my service is not going to be as good, except that people really need the service. And so it's this fine line, and it's very difficult for the communities, and that makes it very difficult for family members.
Yeah, it is. And that financial burden is again pretty significant. I think people underestimate that in particular. And so what have you seen as far as families trying to or communities trying to cater to these families where they know that the cost probably at the level of care that people really want and sort of expect has to be at a level where the monthly expense or the entry fee, whatever, is going to be pretty high.
Yes, I think that there's a broad awareness in the senior living ecosystem that we need more middle market product. And what that looks like, I think we're really struggling with. We've seen some operators take old hotels or even old obsolete senior living communities and refurbish those at lower costs. You'll find in many markets, you'll find sort of what do I say, mom and pop local enterprises who are running what might be considered to be downscale at risk of insulting sort of a more of a Motel 6 style or property at a more reasonable uh, price point. And then, depending on the state, the other option that is out there are, and I live in California, Northern California, as you know, Mark, and in California, we have thousands and thousands of these small home-based, typically 6-bed communities, and they can be more affordable. My mom was in one a number of years ago for about 8 months where she passed away. It was not any less expensive than an enterprise community, but the level of care they were able to provide, to have somebody just outside the door in the kitchen to be able to look in on her and see if she needed a cup of coffee or a glass of water, that kind of thing, was really served her needs better.
Yeah. And what are you seeing as far as families trying to be able to afford this higher cost of care? Are you seeing that in general they're trying to cut corners on the care or the type of facility that they're going to? Because I know you had mentioned, middle market is an area that kind of needs some more resources, so to speak, or more communities that are in that middle market. But what just to define that for our community, and I know this varies from state to state and location, but what do you consider to be middle market? Like if we're looking at just using rent, like monthly rent as the barometer.
Well, so I think it varies a lot in terms of whether you're in California or Seattle or Mississippi, right? But I think you can find in some of the southern states, you can find independent living that is uh, under $3,000 a month. And independent living would mean an activities program, typically weekly housekeeping and perhaps some laundry services, 3 meals a day, some transportation, those kinds of things. And you could be paying $15,000 for the same thing if it's real upscale and in San Francisco or downtown Seattle or someplace like that. And so it varies a lot, and you've got to look around. You got to be willing to negotiate. Sometimes senior living operators will negotiate if they've got vacancies they're trying to fill out. But the other thing is, I would say that ultimately it's a really expensive, but a lot of people have homes that they can sell or do reverse mortgages on. And family members will contribute to help make it happen. And in most cases, it's not a forever expense. My mom was in senior living for about 8 months. I think the average length of stay for assisted living today is somewhere in the neighborhood of 17, 18 months, a little bit less than that for memory care. And so a lot of times families will just figure out how to pool resources and again maybe sell the house and figure out what they need to do to pay for it to care for mom or dad in those last months.
Yeah. And well, one thing that we've seen that families often miss or are not aware of is the tax implications potentially of selling their home. So we heard of a case recently. Unfortunately, it was too late for us to do anything about it because it had already been done. But somebody who had bought their home, because this generation of seniors are what I call a buy and hold generation, right? They bought their homes many decades ago. You don't really see younger generations staying in their homes for 40 years. It's just different, very different. But what that means is that you probably built up a ton of equity in the home, especially if you're in, let's use California as an example. You may have bought that home 40 years ago for $20,000, and now it could be worth millions potentially. So this family ended up needing to pay for care for a couple of years for a 97-year-old single woman, and they sold the home, but they sold it for $4 million and they bought it for $20,000, and they wrote $1 million check to the IRS. So I think people grossly underestimate how much taxes can play into those big financial decisions.
Yeah, and it's really, really important to do good tax planning and look at those things because I assume that if they had held the property and taken out a mortgage on it, that of course, you get a stepped up basis on somebody's passing right now, and
Right.
there would have been no taxes, right?
Exactly. And then that $1 million would have, well, net of whatever loan they would have taken out, if they take out a couple 100,000, let's just say, to supplement that, then what would have happened is the family would have ended up with that, net, let's say $800,000 rather than the IRS walking away with $1 million. I guarantee the IRS isn't going to send that check back out of the goodness of their hearts. Once you sell, they're going to come and collect. But families oftentimes just don't have the advice they're not engaging with the professionals who would be able to tell them that. And that's partly, one of the many messages we're trying to get out there is that step up in basis. It's a really critical thing that I wish more people knew about. And, estate attorneys certainly know about it. Hopefully financial advisors know about it. I would say a fraction of real estate agents know about it because their job is to sell the home. So you have this kind of lack of information available to families about these types of issues. It could have a massive impact on whether you leave money to the government or to your family. I'm sure everybody would prefer to leave it to their family instead of the IRS. But that's one thing. And then also just, you talked about families, let's say the average cost of care for, I don't know, California, let's just say it were $10,000 a month. If somebody needs that level of care for a few years, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars when you add it up. Roughly a third of $1 million in that example, 3 years over, 10,000 a month, roughly a third of $1 million. That's a lot of cash to come up with. Certainly not going to be covered by Social Security, or not likely to be covered by a pension, maybe an LTC policy if you're fortunate enough to have one of those from planning ahead, as we were talking about, which oftentimes doesn't happen. But it's just the significant cost, especially over time, over a period of time of needing that care, can be tremendous. And what we see a lot is the families do, like you said, they try to chip in, they find a way, maybe they sell the home, maybe they pay a bunch of taxes on it, but they're all trying to pool resources to do that. And what we often say is, well, you've got this valuable home that is an asset just like an IRA or retirement account. Why pull the money from your family and have them be contributing to the cost so that you can get the care that you want and need, as opposed to just leveraging the home to be able to pay for that? The ideal scenario, and one that people should talk to an advisor about, is pulling out equity, because a reverse mortgage, by the way, is not the only option. That's where we are very different, is some of the creative solutions that we have. So people can pull the money out and then they can invest it over the period of time that they need it to hopefully offset some of that interest cost.
And I'm frankly, I'm not a huge fan of the reverse mortgage. I have a good longtime friend of mine whose mother just passed away, and she did a reverse mortgage, and uh, two things happened. She squandered a lot of that money because she had this big chunk of money, and there was cognitive decline, and there's nothing left for the family at all. They're just in the process of deeding the property back over to the reverse mortgage company, and so I think being able to tap into that equity. And the other thing I would just say that makes tapping into that equity, as you're describing, so much better is that once you do that, it gives you a lot more flexibility about the senior living community you're going to pick, right? If everybody's got to contribute into it, then you're looking at it and saying, "Ah, man, I like that place over there, but it's $1,000 a month more, and I don't really want to." That's all. That means everybody's got to pony up another $400 a month, and I don't want to do that. So let's take the lower cost option. And if you do that, and ultimately that asset's there to help mom or dad, right, to take care of them through that end of it. So.
Yeah, and you hope that the family has that mentality. It's not always the case. Sometimes the kids are, looking at it from what am I going to inherit when they're gone, which is really unfortunate. But if somebody's really looking out for their family members, yeah, I mean, you want them, obviously, if you have a good relationship, let's just assume that that's a foregone conclusion. You want them to get the care that they need. You don't want them to be in a subpar community where they're being left by themselves for days on end and nobody is really communicating with them or engaging with them. There's no activities. The food is terrible, because those I would imagine are the things that people are sacrificing when you have a lower cost community. Obviously, you can't pay for nice food, for example, and you maybe don't have as much staff on hand to be able to engage with the residents and things like that. So what you're doing by making those concessions is you're giving less care to the family member. So if you want them to be able to quote unquote pay their own way, sometimes leveraging the home is the way to do that. And yes, it may impact the future inheritance, but it also means that your family member is able to get the care that they want. I mean, obviously every situation is different, of course, but I think most people would want that over the alternative where, the adult children are shelling out money every month, and that may be a burden. Certainly they have their own expenses to think about, but using the home as leverage and in creative ways other than reverse mortgages where you might be giving away equity too fast to the lender, there are some creative things that we can do to help seniors navigate that. And also you find, I know this maybe not be your space, so to speak, but also we find sometimes people want to stay at home. And the cost of home care is even more substantial. Am I correct?
Oh man, home care is so expensive, and frankly, I'm not a big fan of home care unless, I mean, like in my circumstance, right? We're using home care. In my case, we're actually using hospice services, which delivers the home care. But we've got my wife and I are both here, and so we're able to interact. But occasionally, you'll have an older person who's living at home alone and bringing in home care, and the socialization issue becomes a real problem at that point. And there's so much data out there that, particularly for older people, that when they're isolated, when they have this loneliness factor, that it substantially reduces their lifespan. They're talking about 3/4 of a pack of cigarette a day, so 6 or 7 years of reduction of lifespan over time. And more importantly, I think even than that, it just means a very poor quality of life. You really want to set it up so you got a caregiver sitting in the kitchen, and the only thing they're doing is an occasional phone call from kids or grandkids, and the rest of the time watching Jeopardy on TV. That's no kind of life.
Right.
Sorry for all you Jeopardy fans.
Well, Alex Trebek isn't there anymore, so it's just not the same, let's be honest.
That's right.
But you're right. I mean, a lot of times they say that they want home care, but you're right. It's really isolating. It's the resident and the person providing the care most of the time, and they're probably not engaging maybe all that much. And if they are, there's probably not that much to talk about every day, all day long, as opposed to being in some sort of community where they have more engagement and activities and keeping their mind sharp. And I could definitely see that kind of tug and pull as far as what's more important to you, because so many people say they want to age at home, but I don't think they really understand that isolation part and how important that can be to a family member and their longevity in general.
One
So
of the things that I hear stories of, and I've had a little bit of personal experience, is that an older person will make their kids promise to never put them in a home.
right, very common.
I would beg family members to two things: that they never make that promise, because you just can never tell what's going to happen. And the second thing is that sometimes, even if you make that promise, it's a promise that should be broken. It should
Right.
be broken for the family's health, mentally and physically. It should be broken for the older person's health. And there are some kinds of promises that you make that are just not realistic. But it's better if you don't make it at all. But oftentimes, senior living is the best option for people.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, don't set yourself up for failure by preconceived notions. Never really work well in this situation, because it's dynamic and it changes and your care needs change, and you may have a family member who didn't think they would want the socialization, they want to stay at home, but now their needs have changed. So it's definitely a dynamically changing situation when you're caring for a loved one. Have you heard horror stories or issues with people trying to care for their own family members to try to save money?
Well, I think the problem is that it just creates. There's so many problems. I mean, what do? You can't go on a vacation. You can't go out to dinner at night. What happens if mom, dad falls? How do you help them back up? It just so many. I just not crazy about home. I mean, I think that there are some people, and everybody wants to. I think what makes this so hard is everybody thinks they want to stay home. Nobody thinks they want to go to senior living. But most people, after they move into senior living, they and their families go, man, this is much better than I expected. I should have done this sooner.
Yeah. My grandparents, perfect example. They flourished in, I wouldn't say it was quite assisted living, but it was close. And they brightened so much just by being around people they knew and people from their community and new friends that they were making, that if they were at home, they'd be sitting at home most of the day, not really, able to drive anymore. And that socialization brought out the best in them, to be honest. They looked younger, they acted younger. It was really interesting for me to see. I mean, it was years ago. I wish they were still around to talk to them about it, but it really made a huge difference. And you're probably right. It probably extended their life. It probably did.
I almost guarantee that it did. I mean, it's a hard thing to measure, right? But I do. And I think that ultimately, from my perspective, when you go out and look at communities, I think that looking at that social environment is the most important thing you can do. My recommendation would be that you go see what happens at dinner time and see whether there's great resident interaction, what the interaction looks like between family, residents, and staff members. It'll tell you a lot about the culture of the community. And ultimately, it's the most important thing. In fact, I would say that oftentimes what will happen is you get a big, beautiful building where you look at this and say, oh man, this is gorgeous. But if the personal interactions aren't good, that's terrible. And you can go into an older building that's got great community, much, much happier life.
Yeah, that's great advice to go in at dinner. I never even thought about that. Perfect timing. When people are collaborating and they're together and it's supposed to be a joyous time, and if you walk in and it's dead silent, that's probably not a good sign.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Well, Steve, listen, I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. I know people can find you very easily if they search you. You do great work and all the advocacy for seniors and their families and the communities that you support. So I'm a big fan. We'll continue to be a big fan. And I sincerely appreciate you joining me for this conversation today. So thank you.
Great conversation. I appreciate what you do to help people take advantage of the benefits of senior living.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the financial side it's a bear, but there's also a lot of equity in people's homes right now that can be put to use much better than people are normally putting it to use. So that's what we're here for, is find those creative solutions, not necessarily reverse mortgage. There are other alternatives. And the secret sauce for that is having programs that are not driven by income, that allow seniors to qualify. Because obviously, if you're moving into assisted living, you're probably not running a side business out of the extra bedroom, right? We need to find ways to actually help seniors qualify for these things. So that's where we can come in, is helping families plan for the financial side. Again, highly recommend surrounding yourself by all sorts of experts. Tax, estate planning, all these things are, if you don't plan, you will pay one way or another. So we're big advocates for that. But Steve, thank you again so much for joining. And for all of the audience today, thank you for joining. And we'll see you next time. Take care.